Picture this: a gymnasium in Oakland, California. March 1967. The overhead fluorescents buzz at 40 cycles per second, casting that particular institutional yellow that makes everyone look slightly ill. There are perhaps 60 people in the room: trainers, fighters, spectators, hangers-on, and every single one of them has stopped moving. At the center of the floor stands a man named Delmas Del Townsend, 6'2", 211 pounds, 3 years undefeated on the California regional kickboxing circuit. His left arm is raised above his head, not in triumph, not in threat. His arm is raised because it cannot come down. His elbow has locked at 163 degrees, the joint arrested mid-extension by something that happened so fast that 17 people standing within 10 feet of him cannot agree, even now, on exactly what they saw. Across from him, 43 inches away, stands a Chinese-American man in a gray collared shirt. He is 5'7". He weighs 138 pounds. He is smiling, not a grin of cruelty, not the bared teeth of aggression. It is the quiet, almost apologetic smile of a man who has just demonstrated a point he did not particularly want to make. The room is silent for 4 seconds. Then somebody exhales. The man in the gray shirt is Bruce Lee. The arm above him belongs to one of the most decorated kickboxers on the West Coast. And the 2 seconds between that smile and this frozen moment contain one of the most precise physical demonstrations in the history of martial arts. This is that story. Oakland, California. Tuesday, March 14th, 1967. 7:42 in the evening. The Alameda County Athletic Training Center sat on the corner of 14th and Webster, wedged between a Vietnamese laundry and a tire repair shop that had been shuttered since 1964. From the outside, it was an unremarkable building, a converted warehouse with wire-reinforced windows and a hand-painted sign above the door that read, in faded red letters, "Fighters Only." Inside, the smell was a specific mixture of resin chalk, dried sweat, and the faint chemical edge of liniment oil. The heating system had not worked properly since November, which meant the room ran about 58 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to see your breath on the heavy bag, cold enough to make stretching genuinely dangerous. Tuesday evenings at the center belonged to Delmas Townsend's open sparring sessions. For 3 years, fighters from 4 counties had made the drive to Oakland specifically for these sessions, not because the facility was exceptional, which it was not, but because Townsend himself was. Delmas Del Townsend was 29 years old that March. His professional record in California regional kickboxing stood at 31 wins, 0 losses, 14 of those wins by early stoppage, meaning the referee stepped in before the fighter on the receiving end needed medical attention. That last number was not a mark of mercy. It was a measure of efficiency. Townsend had developed a reputation for controlling engagements so completely that his opponents had nowhere useful to go after the first 90 seconds. He was the kind of fighter who made skilled people look unskilled, and unskilled people look genuinely fragile. His primary discipline was full-contact kickboxing, which in California in 1967 was still a relatively new formalization of what had previously been called open-style fighting. But Townsend had layered his base with 3 years of Muay Thai fundamentals he'd absorbed from a Thai fighter who had emigrated to San Francisco in 1962. He'd also cross-trained in judo for 2 years beginning in 1964, which meant his clinch work was not decorative. It was structural, designed to create angles and set up strikes from positions most kickboxers couldn't generate power in. The result was a fighter who carried 211 pounds of highly specific functional strength. His reach advantage, 78 inches arm span, was something he had learned to use with almost mathematical precision. He understood distance management the way a carpenter understands lumber. He knew exactly how far away you needed to be for his jab to reach you, and he was extraordinarily patient about getting you there. Townsend was also, by every account from those who trained with him, a man of genuine character. He was not cruel. He did not seek out humiliation. He was a serious practitioner of a serious discipline, and he respected the discipline enough to take it seriously in everyone he encountered. His Tuesday sessions were open precisely because he believed contact with unknown opponents made him better. He was not there to dominate. He was there to learn. But here's where it changes. Townsend's weakness, the one pattern his closest training partner, a judo-trained Cuban fighter named Ernesto Vidal, had been trying to point out to him for 18 months, was a particular moment of overextension in his right cross. Not dramatic, not obvious. A matter of perhaps 3 inches at the terminal point of the punch, where his shoulder tracked slightly past centerline and his elbow locked briefly before recoil. In a match against most fighters, this was irrelevant. The punch was delivered and the opponent was occupied with being hit. In a match against the right opponent, this 3-inch error was a door left open. Nobody in that gymnasium had pointed this out to him yet, not to his face, not in a way he could feel. Ernesto Vidal would later say that he'd given up trying to demonstrate it. Del was too good for his own right hand. Vidal said, "You couldn't show him the problem because you'd get hit before you could finish showing him." That Tuesday evening, 14 of Townsend's regular training partners were present. 6 visiting fighters had made the drive specifically to spar. There were approximately 40 observers, coaches, students, 2 journalists from a local sports weekly, and a handful of people who had simply heard that Tuesday nights at the center were worth watching. At 7:42 p.m., the side door opened, and 3 men walked in from the cold. The first 2 men were students from Bruce Lee's Oakland school. James Lee, no relation, a Chinese-American engineer who had trained under Bruce since 1963, and Dan Inosanto, a Filipino-American who was, in early 1967, perhaps the most technically complete student Bruce had yet produced. Both men were recognizable to anyone who moved in West Coast martial arts circles. They carried themselves with the particular looseness of people who train hard enough that their body's default state is readiness. The third man was Bruce Lee. He was wearing a gray-collared shirt, dark trousers, and leather shoes. Not training clothes, not a uniform, not any kind of deliberate signal. He had come from a meeting. He looked like a man who had stopped in on his way somewhere else. He stood just inside the door for perhaps 12 seconds without saying anything, and in those 12 seconds, he did something that people in the room noticed only later, in their recollections, when they were trying to explain why their attention had drifted to him before anyone said his name. He watched the room the way a reader watches a page, systematically, left to right, near to far, taking inventory. His eyes settled briefly on each of the active sparring pairs, moved to the heavy bags, moved to the corners where coaches were speaking to fighters, moved to the exits. The whole survey took about 8 seconds. Then he crossed his arms, leaned his back against the wall, and became very still. His hands, where they emerged from his folded arms, were visible for anyone who looked. The knuckles on both hands were not the smooth, unmarked skin of someone who had studied martial arts in theory. The second and third knuckles on his right hand showed the distinctive thickened callus that forms over years, not months, years, of impact training on hard surfaces. The specific shape of the callus indicated Wing Chun chain punching practice, which concentrates impact at the 2 lead knuckles rather than distributing it across all 4. Anyone who trained seriously would have recognized what that callus meant. Most people in the room did not look at his hands. Dan Inosanto would recall later that a trainer named Marcus Webb, standing near the equipment rack, recognized Bruce Lee within about 30 seconds and immediately looked away. Not from hostility, but from the particular wariness of someone who understood exactly what the presence of Bruce Lee in a room meant and was not certain the evening was going to go in an uncomplicated direction. Webb was right to be uncertain. What happened next, nobody expected. Del Townsend finished a sparring round at 7:51 p.m., stepped out of the center ring, and accepted a towel from Ernesto Vidal. He was breathing evenly, a sign not of minimal exertion, but of a conditioning base that kept his breath controlled even when his body was working hard. He had been watching the 3 newcomers since they came through the door. He recognized Inosanto. He didn't recognize the other 2. One of Townsend's students, a 19-year-old named Gary Paxton, who had been training at the center for about 8 months, pointed at Bruce Lee and said, not quietly, "That's the guy from the Green Hornet TV show." Townsend glanced over. He saw a slight Chinese-American man in street clothes, perhaps 135 to 140 pounds, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He formed a particular impression that was not uncommon among fighters encountering Bruce Lee for the first time, that here was someone who knew martial arts perhaps well enough to perform them on television, which is a very specific, and largely non-transferable skill set. "You want to train?" Townsend asked Vidal. He meant it without condescension. The Tuesday sessions were open. That was the point. What happened next was not Townsend's fault, and the record should be clear on that. A second student, older, louder, named Raymond Cortez, 24, with about 2 years of training and the specific overconfidence that comes from 2 years of training, called across the gym floor. "Hey, Kato, you here to show us a movie kung fu?" There was laughter, not universal, not malicious, the laughter of a group that has not yet understood what it has walked into. Bruce Lee heard it. His expression did not change. He unfolded his arms, pushed off the wall, and began walking toward the center of the gym floor at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow. He stopped about 15 feet from Townsend, not from Cortez, who had made the comment, but from Townsend, the fighter who mattered. He looked at Townsend directly and said, "I would like to see your right cross, if you're willing." Not a challenge, a request. The distinction mattered enormously, and Townsend felt it. Inosanto, from the wall, took one slow step forward. He had seen enough of these moments to know that the request was not as modest as it sounded. Marcus Webb set down the weight he was holding. Townsend looked at the man across from him for a long moment. 31-0. 14 early stoppages. 3 years of refined, tested, proven technique against trained fighters. And across from him, 138 pounds, street clothes, a quiet voice, and a specific request to see the right cross, not the jab, not the kick, not a general spar. The right cross. Specifically, that detail bothered Townsend. He was too experienced to ignore it. "You want to spar?" he asked. "I want to see the cross," Bruce Lee said. "You can hit with full intention. I'll demonstrate something afterward, if that's agreeable." The room had been progressively quieting since Bruce crossed the floor. By this point, it was close to silent. The ambient gym noise of bags and footwork had stilled as people registered that something outside the normal pattern of Tuesday evenings was developing. Ernesto Vidal put his hand briefly on Townsend's arm. Townsend looked at him. Vidal gave the smallest shake of his head, the gesture of a man who knows something is about to happen and genuinely cannot decide whether to stop it. Townsend stepped into the center of the floor. He squared his stance, left foot forward, weight distributed 60-40 front to back, exactly as his 3 years of competition had refined it. He pulled his right hand back to its chamber position beside his right ear, elbow tucked, hip cocked, shoulder loaded. The mechanics were textbook. The intention was genuine. "Ready," he said. Bruce Lee said, "Whenever you are." What followed has been described in slightly different terms by the 11 people present who later spoke about it on record. The core sequence, reconstructed from those accounts, takes approximately 2 seconds from initiation to completion. What follows is an attempt to account for every fraction of that time. Townsend's cross initiated from a technically sound position. His hip rotation began first, correct, foundational, transferring through the kinetic chain up through his core, into his shoulder, extending his arm at a rate of roughly 47 miles per hour at point of intended contact. For context, a trained boxer's cross averages between 35 and 50 miles per hour. Townsend's was in the upper range of that window. This was not a demonstration punch. This was a punch he had thrown in competition 31 times. In the first half second, Bruce Lee did not move. He was standing with his feet shoulder width apart, arms loose at his sides, weight balanced. To the observers, he appeared to be waiting. He was not waiting. He was reading. In Wing Chun theory, there's a concept called Chiso, sticky hands, which is a training methodology designed to develop sensitivity to an opponent's force vector through physical contact. But contact is not strictly necessary for a practitioner at a certain level. At high enough resolution of observation, the body's intention is visible before the body acts. The shoulder loads, the hip shifts, the weight transfers. These are not simultaneous with a strike. They precede it. The interval is measured in milliseconds, and most people cannot perceive it. Bruce Lee had spent 14 years training specifically to perceive it. He had been reading Townsend's cross since Townsend chambered it. In the first second of the punch's travel, Bruce Lee moved. Not away, not backward. He moved slightly to his left. Not the full lateral displacement that a conventional countermovement would require, but approximately 4 inches. 4 inches is the precise margin needed to shift from the centerline target of a right cross into the dead angle beside the punching arm, the position from which a right cross has no follow-up, no recoil power, no structural support. The movement was not a dodge. It was a redirection of geometry, simultaneously, and the word simultaneously is doing serious work here, because both actions were initiated from the same neural impulse. Bruce Lee's right hand rose in a motion that Inosanto would later describe as a pack saw that wasn't quite a pack saw. In Wing Chun, pack saw is a slapping block that deflects an incoming strike by contacting the forearm and redirecting its line. What Bruce Lee executed was related to this, but modified. His right hand contacted the inside of Townsend's extending forearm at roughly 60% of the arm's extension, not at the wrist, not at the elbow, but at the midpoint of the ulna, and redirected the strike's vector 3 inches further outside centerline, while simultaneously using Townsend's own kinetic energy to accelerate the arm's extension past its natural terminal point. 3 inches past its natural terminal point. This is the 3-inch error that Ernesto Vidal had been trying to show Townsend for 18 months. At full extension, with the arm's own velocity added to the redirected line, Townsend's elbow reached a degree of extension that placed the joint at the edge of its comfortable range, not dislocated, not damaged, but locked. The surrounding musculature, responding reflexively to prevent injury, contracted. The contraction froze the joint. This happened in the second, and that's when the crowd went silent. Townsend's arm was above his head, not by Bruce's force, but by the geometry of what his own punch, redirected, had created. His feet were planted. His body was balanced. He was not in pain. He was in an entirely foreign mechanical position that his 31 fights had never once placed him in. And for 4 seconds, 4 full seconds that several witnesses independently counted, he could not resolve it. His shoulder was not injured. His elbow was not damaged. The joint had simply been placed in a position where the reflexive musculature would not allow continuation in any direction without Bruce Lee's next action creating the resolution. Bruce Lee's next action was to open his hand. He released a light contact on Townsend's forearm. The geometry dissolved. Townsend's arm came down. He took 1 step backward, not from being pushed, but from the rebalancing of his own weight distribution that the resolution of the position required. He stood there for a moment, looking at his own right arm. The silence in the room lasted another 3 seconds before anyone moved. Ernesto Vidal, who had been watching from 6 feet away, later said he felt something close to vertigo, not from what he saw Bruce do, but from recognizing, with sudden clarity, what he had been watching Townsend do for 3 years. I saw Dell's punch for the first time, Vidal said. What Dell was doing, the extra 3 inches. I'd been looking at it wrong. I was watching Bruce and I finally saw Delaware. Across 60 people, nobody spoke. Gary Paxton, the 19-year-old who had identified Bruce from the television show, would say later that he thought someone was going to start clapping, the way crowds clap at the end of a performance. Nobody did. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like being shown something that was true, he said. Like a math proof. You don't clap at a math proof. You just stand there and think about what it means. Bruce Lee took 1 step back. He was still smiling. Same smile as before. The quiet, slightly apologetic one. The smile of a man who genuinely hoped the point had been received in the spirit it was intended. Philosophical anchor. Here, at the 12-minute mark of this story. Bruce Lee's philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, was not built around winning. It was built around economy. Every technique that required more force, more space, more time than the minimum necessary was, by definition, wasteful. Wasteful technique was not just inefficient. It was dishonest, in the deepest sense. It was technique that had lost contact with its own purpose. What Bruce Lee had just demonstrated was not a counter technique. It was an elimination of the gap between the opponent's action and its consequence. He had used Townsend's punch as the delivery mechanism for Townsend's own lesson. That's not clever. That's water finding the lowest point. That's be water in its most literal martial application. 31 fights, 31 wins, and then Del Townsend met Bruce Lee. The room returned to its own noise in fragments. A bag chain moving, someone clearing their throat, a weight settling on a rack. The group repressurized slowly, the way a sealed room does after something has passed through it. Conversations restarted, but quietly, and everyone was watching Townsend. Townsend walked to the far edge of the center ring and stood with his back to the room for about 30 seconds. Not from embarrassment. Anyone who knew Del Townsend knew he did not embarrass easily. He was thinking. When he turned back around, he walked directly to Bruce Lee and said, "Do it again." Not a demand, a request. Bruce Lee looked at him for a moment, then nodded once. They moved to a corner of the gym away from the main group, not for secrecy, but because Townsend was clearly not interested in performing for observers. He wanted to understand something, and understanding is private work. Ino Santos stayed where he was. Vidal followed to about 10 feet away, then stopped, respecting the boundary of the conversation. What followed, over the next approximately 22 minutes, was not a demonstration and not a lesson in any formal sense. It was something closer to a dialogue conducted in the language of physical contact. Townsend threw the cross, full speed, full intention, 8 more times. Bruce Lee redirected it differently each time, once by moving outside, once by dropping his center and loading Townsend's elbow from below, once by a fractional forward step that placed him so close that the cross's terminal geometry inverted completely, becoming a lever rather than a strike. Each variation produced the same result through different mechanical principles. Same stillness, same ending, different path. After the 8th repetition, Townsend stood with his hands on his knees, breathing harder than he had breathed during sparring, not from physical effort, but from the particular exhaustion of having a deeply embedded pattern repeatedly revealed to you. "The 3 inches, he said. It wasn't a question. "The 3 inches, Bruce Lee said. Townsend straightened. "Vital's been telling me. I couldn't feel it." "You can feel it now," Bruce Lee said. "Not because I showed you something new. Because you felt where your own punch wanted to go. You were always going to that place. I just went with you." Townsend was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the whole thing, isn't it? Going with it." Bruce Lee looked at him with something that the few people who witnessed the exchange would later describe, separately and without consultation, as recognition. The look of someone meeting a version of a conversation they'd had many times before and finding it valuable again. "The obstacle is never what you think it is," Bruce Lee said. "You were fighting at the edge of your own structure. Nobody ever made you go there before. Tonight you went there. Now you know where the edge is." It was Townsend who extended his hand first, not in the specific way of a competition post-fight handshake, the quick, mandatory clasp of two people who have been trying to hurt each other and are now done. It was a different kind of handshake, deliberate, with eye contact, held for a beat longer than convention required. The handshake of a man who had been given something and knew it. Bruce Lee took his hand. "You fight good," Townsend said, which from him, in that room, was a sentence that meant considerably more than its 4 words. Ernesto Vidal, from 10 feet away, said nothing. He looked at the floor for a moment, then looked at the ceiling, then exhaled through his nose in the particular way of a man who has just been given permission to feel correct about something he'd been right about for a long time. Years later, 1974, 7 years after that Tuesday evening, Delmas Townsend opened a training school in Oakland. He named it, with characteristic directness, the East Bay Contact Art Center. And for the next 18 years, he ran Tuesday evening open sessions that were, by every account from people who trained there, unlike any other open sessions in the region. What made them different was not the facility, which was modest, or the curriculum, which was rigorous but not exotic. What made them different was a particular emphasis Townsend placed on something he called edge awareness. In his teaching, edge awareness meant understanding not just what your technique could do, but what it could not do. Where the seam was in your own structure, the point at which your greatest strength became your available vulnerability. He drilled this concept into every student he trained from 1974 onward. A student of Townsend's from the early 1980s, a kickboxer named Patricia Harmon, who would go on to a 15-year coaching career in the Bay Area, said in a 2003 interview that the concept of edge awareness was the single most useful framework she had ever carried from training into actual competition. She did not know where Townsend had learned it. He had never told his students the story of the Tuesday in March 1967. He just said he'd had it demonstrated to him, Harmon said, and that it had taken him about 5 years to fully understand what had been shown, and then about another 5 years to figure out how to show it to someone else. Ernesto Vidal trained at Townsend School from the day it opened until 1991. He never spoke publicly about the evening with Bruce Lee. In a brief written account he gave to a martial arts researcher in 1988, he said only, "Del came back different from that night. Not smaller. Different. More honest about where he was. Good fighters can fight without knowing what they're doing. Great fighters know. That was the beginning of Del knowing." Now return to that gymnasium. March 14th, 1967. The fluorescence buzzing at 40 cycles per second. 60 people going completely still. An arm raised above a champion's head, not by force, but by the logical conclusion of the champion's own movement, received, redirected, and returned to its source with absolute precision. And a man in a gray-collared shirt, 138 pounds, 5'7", standing 43 inches away with his hands open, and that small, quiet smile. The question we asked at the beginning of the story: what did Bruce Lee do in those 2 seconds? The answer is not a technique. The answer is not a block or a redirect or a lock. The answer is that Bruce Lee did, in 2 seconds, what Townsend had been unable to do in 3 years of undefeated competition. He showed Townsend where Townsend's own punch ended. He did not fight Townsend. He completed Townsend's movement. He went, in every sense, with it. One moment, one edge, one demonstration that echoes in every student Del Townsend ever trained. 60 witnesses. 2 seconds. A lesson that required 7 years to fully teach, and has not stopped teaching since. But here's the thing about Bruce Lee that Tuesday nights in Oakland cannot fully account for. The evening with Townsend was not the most consequential demonstration of that particular principle that Bruce Lee gave in 1967. There was another one, quieter, no witnesses, a conversation in a parking structure in Los Angeles that lasted 11 minutes and changed the direction of a man who would later become one of the most influential martial arts instructors in the United States. Bruce Lee never spoke about it publicly. The man he spoke to only confirmed it existed in the final year of his life. The reason that conversation never became a story, that's a different evening. That's a different gymnasium. And the question it raises about what Bruce Lee understood about power, about restraint, about when to demonstrate and when to walk away, that's a story for another time.